Faith Bible Church, Russell and Jamey here.
Hey guys.
Jamey made the promise that we were going to drop a video, and so we're here. We're dropping a video. We were going to call it a podcast.
Yeah, we're not sure. Is it a podcast? Is it a vlog? We don't know. We're not that cool. So
Yeah, we've been told it's neither. Maybe an informational video. So here we are, hopefully with some information
doing an informational vlog
on Ephesians.
Yeah, the podcast.
The podcast.
There we go.
For real, we decided, hey, chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. Mm-hmm. No way to cover it all in 3 sermons, 4 sermons, whatever it was. So we thought, hey, what are the things that we missed? Mm-hmm. And since you preached last, you get to go first.
I'm on the hot seat first.
That's right.
Man.
Yeah, you came into my office and we're like, hey, what do I need to say about predestination? Or did you miss some stuff? Or were there some things you wanted to say? And
yeah.
So Jamey, what did you want to say about predestination that you didn't feel like I covered well 2 weeks ago? And
you did. I used your language and everything, man.
You did. Thank you.
I thought actually you covered it really well.
Oh,
so, but I felt like it's helpful in a video like this just to dig a little deeper because I think there's a lot of confusion around predestination. We talked about that a little bit. I think people, it's a loaded word, man. What do we mean when we say that? And what does the text mean when we read that? And so it comes up twice in this. Also says we're chosen in Him. So, when you see language like that, it's like, all right, what does that mean? Is that so?
Yeah, you had said, we both agree that it's less about the who and more about the what. Yeah. And so we have the first one in verse 5, He predestined us to adoption. Mm-hmm. So that's not really the who, that's the what. And so the final destination for those of us who put our faith and trust in Jesus is that we have this new position as sons.
Yeah, and in fact, like the 2 times it's used, it's the redemption it's the adoption, predestined us to adoption as sons, and then you get to verse 11, we've obtained an inheritance having been predestined, and so both of those times it's something I would argue future oriented. Sure. Even the adoption, Romans, you get into Romans 8, and it gets to he addresses adoption. And he gets to the end and says in verse 22, we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. But we also, having the first fruits of the Spirit, we talked about the Spirit being a pledge of our inheritance. Having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. And so it's like, if in Ephesians 1 and Romans 8, there's like this already not yet thing going on. We've received the Spirit of adoption as sons, but we're not going to fully and finally realize that until we see Him face to face. And so this idea that we're predestined to that, and we're predestined to this day when God redeems His own possession, like verse 14 says, or this final. He's claimed us as an inheritance, but we don't. That family photo doesn't happen until we see Him face to face. And so both times, I think in Ephesians 1, where predestination is used, it's something forward looking, And I think a lot of times, I think the reason it's worth addressing. A lot of times, people think of predestination as being, I was predestined to believe, right? I was predestined to place my faith in Christ, or I was, God predestined me to place my faith in Christ and have salvation. But every time it's forward looking and even goes beyond just the destination to the purpose of the destination. Both verse 11 and verse 5, it's, it's to the praise of the glory of His grace, to the praise. So the end result is praise, that he gets praise out of that destination. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but
no. When you think about it, we're assuming people understand that the other argument out there, or the other interpretation with calling in verse 4, or he chose us, and then predestination verse 5 and 11, that language has the idea for some that there's this individual election to salvation. And so we here at Faith Bible would say, we don't believe in an individual election to salvation, even though some would look at Ephesians 1 and say, oh, it seems like it's teaching that fairly clearly. I think for me, when I think about election and predestination, those words, which are actually pretty rare in the New Testament, where they show up again in Romans, which is another really tricky passage. But it shows up again in Romans chapter 9, and when it shows up in Romans chapter 9, again, it's the language of Israel. It's not the language. It's not this language of individual election to salvation. There's the language of Israel with election, inheritance, redemption. Those were corporate in nature. It was the nation of Israel that was God's chosen ones that he redeemed. And then out of that, you have the chosen one, Jesus Christ. And so sometimes it's helpful when you think about Romans chapter 9 and the language of election and predestination. There we have it clearly in terms of Israel. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see the corporate identity even in Ephesians 1, just to tag off of what you're saying. I mean, this idea of it's a corporate thing. It's not, I mean, he's talking about adoption as sons, plural, the inheritance that he's claimed, the redemption of his own possession. I mean, that's all corporate. And couched in the middle of all of that, he says he made known to us the mystery of his will. Well, later on in chapter 2, he's going to clearly define what the mystery is, and that's Jews and Gentiles coming together as the church, this new community in the Spirit, that he's planned that far beforehand. Because you could, I mean, I alluded to this Sunday, but you could easily go, well, okay, God's chosen was Israel. They rejected him. So is the church this plan B? And I think he's saying, no, this has been my plan all along, you know, is this new corporate identity. So I think what you're saying, man, I feel like the text kind of screams that. This, you know, and then you talked about it a couple weeks ago. I echoed it, just that we who are the first to hope in Christ, being Jews, and him, you also Gentiles, them coming together, new community in the Spirit. That's the new corporate identity that he's chosen, predestined, purposefully and deliberately willed that to happen. And so, I like that corporate identity thing you just threw out. I think that's cool.
I think as we read these passages and for us, as we think through, I mean, obviously this would have been really tricky to cover on a Sunday morning in depth and detail. One last thing that I would say, in verse 4, he chose us in him, and what he chose us for, again, is, here's the what, not the who, that we would be holy and blameless. So it says nothing there about choosing us individually for salvation. It's choosing us to be holy and blameless. And so when you look at the us, who's the us? It's the holy ones that are mentioned in, verse 1. And so anyway, just always interesting just to, whenever we get the text, how much we sometimes read some things into it, and that word chose or predestined, it just has a lot of baggage and things we presuppose in its meaning. So, anyway.
Well, and just to tag on to that chose thing, like the chosen to be holy and blameless. I mean, you fast forward in Ephesians in chapter 5, and we're going to get to this in the spring, but the context of husbands and wives, and it talks about Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church, gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her. set her apart, right?
Yeah.
Having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless.
Yeah.
It's that word again. And so, yeah, that's what he wants for the church. And so, and then you get to Colossians, and there's an element, you mentioned this as well, that, Colossians, there's so many similarities between Colossians and Ephesians, but when Paul mentions the idea of being presented holy and blameless in Colossians, he says, if indeed you continue in the faith, firmly established and steadfast. There almost seems to be a condition to that. Like, it's not this automatic. And so then what Paul says a few verses down in Colossians 1:28, he says, we proclaim Jesus, admonishing every man and teaching every man with all wisdom, so that we may present every man complete in Christ. And so this idea of like, man, just Paul's cheering the church on, going, hey, keep going. Like, aim for that day, aim for that holy and blameless moment in your corporate identity as a church. And I think that's why Paul in Ephesians is going to say things like, God's prepared beforehand, similar language, not the same words, but he's prepared beforehand good works for you to walk in. You were darkness, now you're light, Ephesians 5:8. Walk as children of light. Like, he's gonna say, hey, walk in these things that God wants you to walk in, looking for that day and aiming to be presented mature, complete in Christ with the church, being presented without spot or wrinkle, holy and blameless. And so, I just think that's a beautiful thing to look forward to and a key motivator,
Yeah.
But,
I guess two other things that I've thought about that I haven't really been able to touch on as I preached through it. And you talked about the word position, which Dave Anderson, former pastor here, like his language of position, condition, it really is stellar, super helpful. And when you think about verses 3 through 14, it is all about our position in Christ, and then, and actually chapters 1 through 3. And then you have our condition now on earth, how we live in light of our position. I hope to hit on that some throughout the series because it's really helpful. But up until this point, I just haven't had much time to cover it. Anything you would add to the position condition statement?
No, that's a great commentary. I mean, it's not an exhaustive commentary, but it's super practical and kind of outlining the position condition aspect.
You're talking about his book.
Yeah, his book. Yeah. It's and actually, like, recommend to anybody Dave Anderson's. What's the name of it? It's
Pretty sure it's called
Position and Condition. I bought it digitally. You can buy hard copies on Amazon, and a great book. But I think you're right. I mean, as you've laid out the series, like, going through chapters 1 through 3 is mostly about this identity, this position, and then going to get really practical in living that out and our condition. And so, I think I love that thought, and I love how Anderson fleshes that out. Looking forward to kind of how that's going to all fit together as you continue to lead us through it. So, what was the other thing?
Last thing, which because when I first started talking about Ephesians, I got really geeked up on these powers and dominions and authority, and I've had to hold it really because I'm like, man, I want to talk about it every week, but we finally get to it this week. And even then, I'm like, I don't know if I have time to really handle it, but it's in our memory verse that we've been memorizing, and I know all of you have been memorizing it. It is the place where he talks about in verse 24 that Christ, after being raised from the dead, is far above all rule and authority and power and dominion. That language is not governors, presidents, senators, police officers. That is, I do think there's an earthly, physical piece to that, but behind it, especially the word power, has a supernatural feel to it. And I want us to talk about that, and we are, because in chapter 2, we were walking according to the prince of the power of this age, this world, and of the air. So clearly there's something in the spiritual world that Christ conquered when he rose from the dead, and we've been rescued from it. And man, in the last of Ephesians 6 is all about spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
And we don't fight against flesh and blood. We're fighting against something else. And so anyway, that language, especially from Acts 19, I'm excited to get into it at some point.
Yeah, I actually remember we were at a conference and we were walking along and you threw out that idea at me and I was like, okay, think about that. And then like I kept reading going, there it is again in the text, there it is again. And I love it and I'm excited to dive into that. Where else do you where else are you seeing it in the text? Like, because I'm sitting there going, okay, you're going to dip into that this week, but, I'm excited to dip into it more. Like, little preview. Can you give us a little, like...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already been throughout the book, the idea of heavenly places. Clearly, we've been blessed in the heavenly places, so there's this realm we don't see. All things are having to be summed up in Christ, things in heaven and things on earth. And so he's clearly talking about something supernatural, clearly a spiritual and an earthly or a physical. You have it multiple times in one, but the language of power shows up in chapter 2. It's going to show up again in chapter 3 in this mystery and again, Christ having authority over authority over dominions and power. And so it's just, you can't miss it from chapter to chapter. And so I'm going to try my best to hit it, but I don't want to spend all of our time talking about these evil spiritual beings in darkness. But I do think it'd be really good for us to be aware of it. So that'll be another podcast or a vlog or
whatever we're calling this thing.
Whatever we're calling this thing.
But on that note, I mean, when you brought that idea in, even just a little glimpse into how we operate internally, we have we call it the production team. It's a creative team of all our creative staff people here, and Jason McMinn, who's in the background right now filming this, and just we're going to break down that. What is it, the third or the fifth wall? I can't remember. It's one of the fourth wall. Anyway, but that's why we have people that know what they're talking about. But he made that bumper video for us that kind of has this contrast of the dark and light. And a lot of you watching that on Sunday morning, you're watching that and you're going, okay, I see the verse up there, and but that's where that came from. Is these that darkness we see, the light we see, the spiritual realm, the spiritual warfare thing happening throughout Ephesians, and so I think that's really cool. And Jason did a great job with that. So.
Yeah, no doubt. Awesome. Well, this was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. We should do it again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it.
Maybe bring in some special guests.
Oh, I can definitely think of some special guests. Maybe we need to bring Anderson in here.
That would be awesome.
And just get him to talk about position and condition.
Get him to bring his book, I'd love it.
Sign it for us.
Yeah. Oh, man. That'd be worth some money.
It would be.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us on our maiden voyage on this vlog podcast.
I think it's a podcast.
It
actually is.
Hey, we got a name for it. It's ding, ding, ding.
Jamey and Russell. It's the Faith Bible Church podcast.
Thanks, y'all. This was fun. Looking forward to more.
Yep.